Daniel Harris, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good. The dust is settling slowly. What is your assessment of where Manchester United are right now?
They're in a pretty good place. They've got a lot of work to do still, so they shouldn't be clapping each other on the back particularly. But considering where they were after they lost to Burnley and where they are now, that is a lot of improvement. And ultimately, what you've seen that Solskjaer, for whatever his faults may be and however much people doubted him, he came into a club that was absolutely on its arse and he's turned it around. And they are now a club that looks like it's going somewhere. If you were a player who United wanted to sign, you might look at it and think, I'd like to be part of that. And the question now is how much money the board give him and whether he's identified the correct areas in which to spend it and whether he picks the right players.
So much has come down to the signing of one individual that has transformed how the club is perceived. Now it looks like their scouting system really works, and it looks like they were building a platform. And it's not a fluke, because obviously this was a player that they identified. But it's wild, the impact that one individual has had.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's kind of a strange one, really, because on the one hand, their scouts did identify him. On the other hand, they didn't buy him in the summer. And maybe the scouts did say, you must sign this man immediately, and no one did. But it doesn't massively smack of that. But yeah, it is true that Bruno's made a huge difference in that first you've got his ability on the pitch, which is immense. He sees the game in a way that other people don't, and he knows where to be, such that even when he's not playing particularly well, games tend not to pass him by, and that he will always contribute some kind of important moment or two. And that's what we saw yesterday. He played out his arse yesterday, but he was still involved in the goal that United scored. So United scored, and the penalty that he took also is significant, because I think that Rashford took a penalty United got against Bournemouth, and he stuck it in the corner, but the goalkeeper nearly saved it and wasn't far off saving it. Whereas with Bruno, I think he's 6-0 from penalties won, and the keepers are getting absolutely nowhere near them. And when you get 17 penalties a game like United do, having someone that you know will score them is important. But I think it is also important to say that United have been good in periods this season before Bruno turned up. They were good at the beginning, and then Pogba got injured, and then Martial got injured, and they were fighting it from then. So although he has turned up talked about his ability before, but his mentality is also important, that he's not hoping things are going to happen. He intends for things to happen, and he intends to make them happen, and he doesn't let his teammates off. And I think that kind of leadership, both by example and by cajoling, is also really important in a side that, for most of the last few seasons, has lacked a bit of on-pitch leadership. And in England and in British football, I think we tend to think of on-pitch leadership as people that scream and shout. But in any sport, and even in cricket and American football, where the captain actually has a lot of big decisions to make, the most important aspect of leadership is leading from the front. You've got to do your own job. And if you have a lot of players that are playing well, even if they're not the kind of people that are screaming and shouting, that still constitutes leadership. And that is the most important element of leadership. And Bruno Fernandes certainly has that. But United were looking good when they had all their players available, even before they signed him. But him signing unlocked lots more potential that was in that team. And yet it is unusual where you buy a player and they turn up and immediately they revolutionise everything that you thought your team was capable of doing, but he has managed that.
John Giles calls that moral courage, and you can see it when it's difficult to get on the ball, but he still gets on it anyway, and he controls it, and he's happy to be taking that risk and to be taking that responsibility on, and that has had a kind of a knock-on impact. One other thing in all this, I think, that is really important is that the previous couple of managers were not going to be there for a long time. They weren't there trying to build a 10-year career there. Van Gaal was there for a short fixed period and kind of knew that Mourinho more than likely was coming at some point. With Solskjaer, he is trying to put long-term strategies in place. So I guess the impact of this is that if somebody comes in and says, oh, my client wants to be the best paid player in the world, Solskjaer's going to say no. Whereas the previous managers were like, well, I don't really care because I'm not going to be here to see the end of that contract. I just want to keep this player happy. I can't see them, for example, giving Alexis the contract that they gave under the previous regimes. I can't see them giving De Gea that contract under Solskjaer. I might be wrong about this, and maybe they're about to give Pogba the biggest contract, and it'll be a giant albatross around their neck if he doesn't play up to it. But it just feels like you now have somebody who is trying to take ownership of decisions that are going to have a long-term impact.
Yeah, I think that what you've got is Andy Mitten did a brilliant interview with Solskjaer for United We Stand, and the greatest line, the best line he in that interview was, "I'd rather have a hole than an arsehole." And one of the things that unites all the people he signed in one way or another is mentality. And he's not just signing people who he thinks are good at football. He's signing people that he thinks are the right kind of person to have around. And I'm sure that's why he pushed the boat out for Harry Maguire. I would be amazed if he thinks that Harry Maguire is as good a defender as the best defenders that he played with, because he isn't. But what Harry Maguire brings, in Solskjaer's opinion, is some presence, some leadership, some calmness, some authority, some dedication. And those were things that were missing in the team, and those were the things that he wanted in the team. And although it took him a while to make Harry Maguire captain, I would be pretty sure that when he bought Harry Maguire, he knew that Harry Maguire was going to be his captain at whatever time it became possible for him to make him the captain politically without pissing off too many people. And I think what you say is right. The other thing about Ole is that although people take the piss at him for being a Fergie tribute act and for playing all the old United tunes and for his whole obsession with United's relentless self-mythologizing, when you're trying to create a culture, that kind of thing actually matters. And what you're seeing with Ole is that because he believes in all that stuff about the club that is very easy to laugh at, it means that he believes in the club. So the decisions that he makes, in his opinion, are for the good of the club. And Van Gaal and Mourinho was more the case, and this isn't particularly a criticism because they're workers and they've got bosses. So the decisions they made were more for the benefit of themselves. Whereas Ole is making decisions that, even if the decisions that he puts in place don't benefit him because he's lost his job by then, they're decisions that will benefit the club. And he has changed the way that people around the club feel. If you remember what United were like towards, not just in the dog days of Mourinho, but for quite some time before that, when he was trying to get himself fired and going through his repertoire of tricks to force that to happen, no one looked like they were enjoying themselves when they were playing for United. And you're playing for Man United. Like, those should be the times of your life. And I think Ole has changed that for the players, and he's bringing through young players. If you're good enough, you will get to play. And with Mourinho, that wasn't so much the case. One of the games that always sticks in my mind is they played Brighton away at the end of the season, and they played out their asses. They lost. And in his interview afterwards, Mourinho couldn't hide his delight at how rubbish Rashford and Martial had been. And he was saying, "You told me I had to play these two guys, I had to play them together. And look, I was right." And what Ole's doing is he's forcing performances out of some less good players, but increasingly he's getting brilliant performances out of his best young talents. And those are the kind of things that didn't really happen under Mourinho. Mourinho tried to get Martial out of the club to sign Ivan Perisic. And what Ole did, and I admit myself, I would have thought Mourinho, I'd had enough of Martial last summer. I'd had enough of the lack of effort. I'd had enough of him standing about waiting for someone to pass him the ball while he was standing still, for him not chasing into the box from the left wing. And what Ole has done is he has turned that guy around. And I don't want to say that everything that we see with Anthony Martial now is because of Ole, because I want to discount the work that the players put in. He must have put in a lot of work. But what he's done is to stop him from indulging his worst habits, he's stuck him in the middle of the pitch. And it looks a lot like he's taught him how to play centre forward now. And he has mentioned it himself, like we've done a lot of work with him, in a way that I don't feel he's done very much work with Bruno Fernandes, because with Bruno Fernandes, they bought the finished article in terms of ability, in terms of mentality. But Martial needed some work, and he needed some love, and he needed some tough love. And Mourinho just wanted to boot him out of the club. And Solskjaer said, no, like, this guy has a lot of ability, and he's coached him and helped him and advised him and inspired him to get the best out of that ability. And I think Martial is probably the most obvious indicator of the difference between a manager like Van Gaal, who was more interested in coaching, but ultimately didn't seem to improve very many of the players, and Mourinho, who just had the ones he liked, had the ones he victimised, and seemed to find it really difficult not only to extract good performances from them, but to give them any credit when they did perform well. Like, even when Luke Shaw had a good game, Mourinho said, well, that was actually because of me.
Yeah.
And Solskjaer has turned that around to be what goes on at United is not because of him or even because of the players, it's all about the club. And we see with Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool, if Jurgen Klopp has really good players at Liverpool, of course he does. But think about how many of those players that Jurgen Klopp has were brilliant players till they encountered Jurgen Klopp. The answer is maybe one or two. Mane was a good player. Salah was a good player. Wasn't a brilliant player. He's a brilliant player now. And that is because of Jurgen Klopp. And if you gave Guardiola's players to Jurgen Klopp, he would probably win the league. If you give him Pochettino's Tottenham players to Jurgen Klopp, he'd have probably won the league with them. If you gave any other manager Jurgen Klopp's players, I don't think Liverpool would probably be champions now. And one of the reasons is because Jurgen Klopp has created something there. It's not just his brilliant tactics or whatever and strategies. It's the way that he brings people in the club together, the players, the staff, the supporters. And that's when you get something that lasts and you get repeated winning. And it looks like that is something that Ole's trying to craft. And he might not be good enough to achieve it because ultimately in the next couple of years, in order to win any of the big pots, he's going to have to be better than Klopp and Guardiola. And that is a big ask. And not being as good as them is not a very good insult because those two guys, those two blokes are brilliant. But Solskjaer is heading down the kind of track where you make people feel happy coming to work and you create an actual club rather than a team. And that was something that neither of the other two managers threatened to do or even really showed the remotest interest in doing.
Who is the next Anthony Martial, in your opinion, Daniel, aka the next player that is a bit of a sleeper in this Manchester United squad, whose mentality needs another tweak and they can go to the next level under Solskjaer?
Well, the two players I used to think and say were players who looked like they'd got to where they'd got to mainly on talent were Martial and Luke Shaw. Luke Shaw still has a lot of work to do, but it was noticeable when he was injured that I found myself saying, United are really missing Luke Shaw here, which weren't words that anyone ever expected to say. And in the last couple of months, particularly, but also before the break, he was forming a really interesting triangle down the left with Rashford and Martial. And he's going to need to keep doing that, and he's going to need to improve, and he's going to need to. And he had, just before he got injured, he'd started actually creating chances by himself. Like there was a couple of open nets, more or less, sort of missed against maybe Palace that were created by him. And he's going to need to start doing that and start doing more of that, because when you're looking to strengthen, left back is one of the positions you'd be looking at. But the fact that he's left-footed is good because Brandon Williams isn't left-footed, and you can see the difference in the balance. Although Williams played well, I thought, yesterday. But I'd also have another fullback coming through called Ethan Laird, who is mainly a right back, but he is, I would imagine, he's going to be forcing his way into the first team by the end of next season because he's extremely talented. So Luke Shaw would be the one who I think has a bit more to give, but he's also going to have to find more to give because if he doesn't, his place is going to be under threat.
It certainly has been a transformative season in terms of how we think of Solskjaer, and he's had enough time now to build and say this is discernibly my culture. As a result, he's now there for the long term, kind of irrespective of what the start of next season is like. Is that what we're saying? That we've reached a point where we know who the Manchester United manager is for the next couple of seasons at least?
No, I don't think it would ever be like that until you start winning stuff. Maybe you win the UEFA Cup, but even then, like if United are 12th at the end of next season, he's going to get fired, and it doesn't matter what he's done this season. I would expect. Like you can only, as Roy Keane said, the only thing that goes with the flow is a dead fish, and you can't afford to stand still. So if he goes, however much money he gets to invest, and I don't know if it'll be that much, he's going to have a better team next season than he had this season. And that being the case, the expectations increase. And this season, top four was something that you would hope for because you looked at where United finished last season and you looked at the players he was allowed to sign and thought, well, actually, that's not really enough to guarantee top four. You've got a chance to top four, but you wouldn't say if you don't make top four that would be a disgrace because the players you've got aren't that good. But now we know that the players that he's got right now are more than good enough to top four. They're good enough for third. And actually, if he'd have had Fernandes all season, and if he'd have had his players, his Pogba and Martial fit for more of the season, he'd been talking about getting closer to second. And United are going to strengthen. So in order to keep your job, you've got to keep improving and get closer. And Whether they're good enough to sustain a title challenge next season is going to depend partially on how much money he's allowed and how much money and whether he spends it well. But it's also going to depend on what he can get out of the players. And if he doesn't get enough out of the players, then he will be out of a job. But he's more deeply ensconced than he has been at any point since he got the job.
How many players does he need to close the gap to sustain a title challenge?
I would say if he could get 2 players, if everything went right and he didn't have injuries, then he'd have a chance. But I'd still expect them to tire because the strength of the squad isn't enough. Like I would say the 2 most obvious areas of the team that need strengthening are centre-back, although Victor Lindelof played really well yesterday. He is not the standard of a United centre-back, but you have these players when you're building in this way, and you see it with Klopp at Liverpool as well. There were players who were not rubbish, who he replaced because they weren't good enough for what he wanted to do. And Lindelof, I would say, is one of those players. He's capable of being good, so he's not someone you say, this guy's absolute nonsense, bin him. But a better centre-back than Lindelof is necessary. And that would be the first place I would probably go with either would be a centre-back, or I'd go for an upgrade on Matic. Increasingly, I'm thinking that would be my first port of call, the midfield player.
Interesting how you haven't mentioned the goalkeeper.
I guess the way I look at that is that United and De Gea are stuck with each other. I can't see any way that they could shift him and his salary. So it's ultimately, we know that he is good at goalkeeping. It's a mental thing, and they have to find a way, between them of making that better. I wouldn't go and bust half of my budget for the summer on a goalkeeper when I had De Gea. I guess I would hope that we could sort the De Gea problem out, and if not, then we'd have to go with Romero until next summer, because I just think that there are other areas of the team where you don't have someone who's potentially someone who could be more than good enough. The thing with De Gea that's odd is that the areas in which he's always needed to improve, he's never improved. Like, he doesn't come for crosses and he doesn't kick well. And those are like things you could work on and become good at. I mean, I know quite easily I know, I'm not saying easy in that I could do it, but if you're someone like him, those are things you should be able to improve. But no, I wouldn't go for a goalkeeper. I'd go for a replacement for Matic. Increasingly, watching United over the last few weeks, that would be my priority, because it's become clear, I think, to teams that play United, if you press United, if you press Matic and the defenders, then they struggle to get the ball out because because basically it's only Pogba who's a reliable passer, except Pogba's not always a reliable passer because he takes risks in areas that he shouldn't. So I would say you want a replacement for Matic. That would be the first thing that I would do. Then the best centre-back that you could possibly find, and obviously it looks like they're going to buy Jadon Sancho. Now, I've seen Jadon Sancho play a fair few times. I've never seen him play and thought this is a brilliant player. But enough people that have seen him much more than me say that if you get the opportunity to sign him, then you just have to do it. So I guess I'm prepared to accept that. And United do need a right winger. And also what we saw in the last few weeks of the season was that there was no alternatives outside the front three. So another player is essential. And someone that you can bring in to make sure that you can rest players. So what I think will happen, the first choices will be Jadon Sancho and a centre-back. I'm not even sure they want to buy a midfield player at this point, but if they can then raise enough money from sales, they'll get the chance to buy another player of some sort. But that's what I would expect to happen.
Is Declan Rice the actual perfect player, because he can play either in midfield or as a centre-back, and he could have a really good Manchester United career with either of those positions, but while he is still developing as a player, you can play him in both. So Lindelof can come in and out of the team if he needs to be rested. Matic can come in and out of the team if he needs to be rested. Matic is they've obviously signed him to a new deal, so he's the type of player who will play 25 to 30 games next season. And let's face it, they're going to be playing 65 games next year, a lot of them at very high intensity, where you're going to need a lot of bodies.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think with Rice, he's someone who seems to have improved quite a lot recently. I don't know. I think that if you sign someone like that, you say this is your position and you play them there. But if he's going to be a centre-back, then centre-backs generally tend to develop slightly more slowly than strikers, because strikers much more about instinct and improvisation. Whereas to play centre-back, you need to think about your game quite a lot. You need to think about what the opponent's going to do, and it's something that you learn. Even however natural a defender that you are, most strikers, more or less, are as good as they're going to be when they're 23, 24. They might stay that good for quite a long time, but they're learning the game still, but ultimately they're much closer to their ceiling at that point. Whereas if you sign someone like Declan Rice and you're moving him to play centre-back from midfield, number one, you want him to learn that position. And number two, you want to build a partnership with whoever he's going to play. So I wouldn't want to sign someone like that, like Declan Rice, and say, well, we'll play you sometimes here and a bit there. It would be more, this is what you are. And in an emergency, then they might play him somewhere else. But also as a midfield player, when you're playing someone in front of the back form, particularly when the other two midfielders are Pogba and Fernandes, then learning positioning and learning when to pass the ball, because more or less you're learning how to control the pace of the game. And again, there are very few players in their teens or early 20s that are good enough to do that. I mean, there are very few players who are 27, 28 who are good enough to control the game. And if you're getting someone in and intending them to do that, then you just want them to settle in. You don't want them to be thinking about what position they're going to be playing next week. You want them to learn the position and to play the position. Earlier on in the season, and last season, when I saw Declan Rice play, he looked a bit like a centre-back playing in midfield. But over the last few weeks, he's actually looked much more like a midfield player. I thought he played really well against United the other day, and his passing's improving, and we can see that he can shoot from distance as well. Again, I need to see more of him because his short game needs to be good. I would say to play that position, the main thing that you need to be able to do is you need to be able to pass the ball forward quickly and ideally off both feet. And you need to also be able to do that under pressure. And that's why Sergio Busquets was the greatest player at playing that position, because he could do those things. He could find the yard and he could pass the ball forward quickly. Paul Scholes could do it as well. And if you play someone like Rice there, who's not a runner, because City do it a different way. City play two attacking midfield players usually, and then they have Fernandinho sort of covering a third of the pitch almost, extends from the centre circle backwards. And City tend to do it more with legs than with passing. So you need to decide what kind of player you want. If you're signing Declan Rice, I don't think he's someone who's going to cover as much distance. So what he would need to do would be need to control the game, control the tempo of the game with the passing, and make sure that if another team was pressing, you don't necessarily need to get the ball wide or long to get around it, but you have someone who can pick clever 5, 10, 15-yard passes to get things moving. And that's the kind of player that United would need. And I'm not certain that Declan Rice could do it, but I certainly think it's more possible than I did 4 months ago.
So you wouldn't be disappointed if he signs, but you're not entirely convinced that it's going to be an automatic straightaway success.
It's not that I'm not convinced, it's that I would feel that I don't feel I have seen enough 90 minutes of Declan Rice to say, yeah, this is definitely the case. What I would say is that my friend, colleague at The Guardian, Jacob Steinberg, has seen a lot of Declan Rice, and he thinks Declan Rice is a really, really good player. But he's seen a lot more of West Ham, so I guess although I give the impression of having a lot of opinions, I try and restrict them to things I actually feel like I've got the right to have an opinion about, and Declan Rice isn't one of those things. So I think that I like what I've seen over the last kind of 4 or 5 months, but if I wanted to know about Declan Rice, I would definitely ask someone that has seen more of Declan Rice than I have.
All in all, it's been a very positive season from Manchester United's perspective, given how low they were at the end of the Mourinho era. Is that a fair summation of where we are at the moment? Yeah,
for sure. It was difficult at times. What's been good for United about this season is even in the dog days of Pereira in midfield, they managed to find performances in the big games. If you look at the top of the table, Liverpool, they lost to twice, but they were within a few minutes of beating them at Old Trafford. And actually, if they'd have had Bruno Fernandes, then they might have got something at Anfield as well. They've beaten Chelsea 3 times out of 4. They've beaten City 3 out of 4, and they've beaten Leicester twice. And they've got a win in the draw against Tottenham and a win in the draw against Sheffield United. So that is good. That's better than good, actually. That's excellent. And what they started to do is they started to beat the teams that they should have beat. So they should always be beating, and they've actually started to do it in style. There was a drop-off towards the end of the season when they got knackered, but you can see that they've reached a point now where their bottom level is increasing and their top level is increasing, and they now need some tweaks to elevate both of them. They need to fill the holes in the team, and they need to strengthen the squad a bit too. But ultimately, if someone had offered you third place, quarterfinals of the UEFA, then you would say, yeah, that is all right. And they also got to the semi-finals of the other two cups. They were close against City. And again, if they signed Bruno Fernandes in time to play City in the first game, that might have, at home in the League Cup, that might have made a difference. And they were still quite close. So, yeah, it hasn't been overwhelmingly positive because there was a lot of negativity in the first part of the season, and rightly so. But as soon as they got all the players fit, they look like a team.
Yeah.
And it's a long time since we've been able to say that.
Well, Daniel, great stuff. Enjoy what remains of the off-season. Obviously, there's plenty of European football to look forward to as well. So we'll obviously talk to you very soon. In the meantime,
All right, see you again. Have a good day.
Cheers.